1 second. Okay. We are ready. We are ready. We are ready. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome. This Parshah's Chayei Sara. Chayei Sara, the life of Sara. Life of Sara. The Parsha begins with the story of Sarah's passing. The pasuk begins by Chayei Sara. The life of Sara was 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. Shnei Chayei Sara. These are the years of Sarah's life. Now, coming from last week's Parsha, where we were reading about a lot of big events, huge incidents. I mean, if you follow from the beginning of Bereshis, I mean, we're constantly reading about really big things are happening, big events, big incidents. I mean, the creation of the world, the flood with Noah, and the story of Abraham and the fights, the wars that he is battling. I mean, there's a lot of things are happening. Big things are happening. Last week's Parsha, especially, Sodom and Gomorrah, Avram Avinu doing big things. Parshas Vayero was quiet international events happening. I mean, not just Vayero, Parshas Lech Lecha as well. Avram travels. We get very little a glimpse into Avram Avinu's private life. I mean, we have the story of Ishmael being born, Yitzchak being born. But this is all outstanding incidents in the lives of Avram and Sarah and the history of the universe. Comes to Parshas Chayei Sara, suddenly the whole rhythm kind of like slows down tremendously. Parshas Chayei Sara is kind of like a very slow story. Life cycle events, you know. Sarah passes away. Avram has to deal with finding a grave for Sarah. He needs to negotiate to get a place to bury her. I mean, unfortunately, this is a normal part of life, you know. When someone passes away, instead of dealing with the people of Chayei or dealing with Ephron, you know, we have to deal with the burial society. We have to deal with the Chevra Kadisha, finding a burial spot. A very average, normal story of a person's life. And then we have a huge, long chapter, the longest chapter in the entire Chumash, 67 verses, I think it is, all about a shidduch, you know, finding a match for Yitzchak, 67 verses, all about finding a matchmaker, Eliezer, to travel down to find the shidduch. No, I mean nothing heart-wrenching about the whole story. I mean, Avram gets Eliezer and he asks him to go down to find a match. Very slow rhythm again of a story. Nothing earth-shattering. Nothing really shaking and moving. And then the end of the parsha. Again, we have Avram back in the picture, where he remarries for the third time. You know, he was married to Hagar, and he's married to Sara, and now he's married a new wife. Her name is Keturah. According to most opinions, Keturah was Hagar. He took back Hagar as a wife. He has 6 children. And at the end of the Parsha, and we have the story of Avram's passing, and we have a little bit of the family of Ishmael. That's it. I mean, the Parsha is not anything. You read the Parsha this week, it's like there is no events. You know, sometimes you read a Parsha, you have an event. The event of the flood, the event of Sodom and Gomorrah. Last week we were dealing with big events. The world was changing. This week, as we're going into the privacy of the life of would we say, the routine, the regular gray day-to-day life of Avram Avinu, dealing with struggles that probably each and every one of us and will have to deal at a certain point of our life. If it's some, God forbid, when our parents pass away or a loved one, to find a burial place to bury them, and negotiation around that. And we're going to have to marry our children, God willing, at a certain point, finding a shidduch for our kids. Very simplistic events of life. And obviously, we all understand is that the Torah gives us here tremendous lessons and tremendous teachings that are supposed to inspire each and every one of us about the life of Avram, the life of Sara, the life of Yitzchak, the marriage of Yitzchak, and everything that comes with it. So there is something very special about this parsha. First of all, on a personal note, I got engaged. It was Parshas Chayei Sara, 19 years ago. And obviously getting engaged in Parshas Chayei Sara, where you have the whole story of an engagement of and a marriage of the first Jewish boy together with Rivka. So that Parsha was very well studied that year, and finding a lot of connection of living with the time and connection to the Parsha. But there's a very, very unique and very powerful thread that goes through this entire Parsha that I will share with you today in tonight's class. I just want to take a couple of incidents and kind of like explore them. And then we're going to string it back together and find the depth, the inspiration, the incredible teachings that exist in this week's Parsha. And I will start from the beginning. The beginning incident is the incident of summing up the life of Sara, 127 years. Sara dies, and Avram is an obligation to find himself a grave for Sara. And by the way, this is a moment of trial for Avram, not just the trial of losing his wife, the one who lived 100 years, 127 years together with him, side by side, and suffering all those years, not having children, and then dealing with all his travels. And she was actually his partner in spreading the teachings of monotheism and the teachings of God. But Abraham, the one who the land of Israel was promised by God over and over again and again, finds himself at one moment where he doesn't even have 1 square foot that belongs to him at the land that God promised him. After all, God promised him the land of Israel, the entire land of Israel. And here comes a moment where he needs a piece of land. He needs a piece of land where to bury his wife. And he has to pay top dollar. After long and painful negotiations, he has to pay top dollar to find that grave where he needs to bury his wife. And that is a moment of a test to Abraham. It's a moment of a test to Abraham where he has to basically figure out a way how to make a move to own acquisition, to own a piece of land in Israel that really belongs to him, to bury his wife. And that's the opening incident of the parsha, is how he doesn't want to receive that portion as a gift. He doesn't want to receive it as an honorable citizen. They try to offer him as an honorable citizen. They call him Nasi Elohim, Ata B'Kirbeinu, you are a Prince of God among us. And they want to give him the land just for the grace, the merit that are based on his status. And Avram is not willing. He's only going to bury his wife in a piece of land that he's buying with his own money. And as the Parsha completes that story, was that the acquisition is done. He acquires that in front of all the members of the city. He acquires the field, and this is the place where Avram buries Sara, and it becomes the place where Avram, and it will be buried later on. Later on, Yitzchak and Rivka will be buried there. And at the end, Yaakov and Leah will be buried there as well. This is the place till today. Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave, the double cave, this is where Adam and Eve were buried. And the famous story how Avram found out that Adam and Eve are buried there is when he was bringing, the Medrash says that when he was going to bring the three calves, and he wanted to get three tongues for the angels. So one of the calves ran away, and Avram was chasing him together with Ishmael. And he came to that cave, and he smelled in that cave a smell of paradise. And he understood that this is the place where Adam and Eve are buried. This is why he wants to buy that piece of land to bury his wife, and eventually he will be buried there as well. But now, the next majority of the Parsha, like we said, 67 verses out of 120 of this week's Parsha, are telling us the story of sending the messenger to get Rivka as a wife. Now, it's very interesting that we don't have anywhere in the whole story the name of the messenger. The name of the messenger is not written anywhere in the story, but we somehow, Rashi and everyone else, points out that the messenger, whose name is not mentioned here, his name is Eliezer. This is the famous Eliezer who goes out for battle. We read about him last week, that he goes out for battle for Avram, and he's the one who, the entire house of Avram is being ran by this man Eliezer, who happened to be a Canaanite. He's not a Semite. He's from the family of Ham, and he joins Avram in spreading the faith and all the teachings and everything. Avram calls in his servant, chapter 24, and he makes him give him an oath, a promise. And the promise is that you're not going to marry my son to anyone from the Canaanites. You're going to go to the land where I came from, Mesopotamia, Haran, and you'll take a wife for my son Yitzchak from there. But here starts an exchange between Avram and his slave. The slave, the Eved, again, doesn't say his name, but we know it's Eliezer. Eliezer turns to Avram and he says, what happens if the woman does not want to come with me? So Avram says, if a woman doesn't want to come with you, then you cannot take my son back to that place. Meaning to say, Yitzchak is a consecrated child, is a holy child. He cannot leave the land of Israel. He has to stay in the boundaries of the land of Israel. Ever since the binding of Isaac, Yitzchak became holy, and therefore Yitzchak cannot return, cannot leave the land of Israel. And if the woman doesn't want to come, then the entire promise, the oath, is not a promise, and you'll find a shidduch locally. You know, there's other Semites in this area that you could find a shidduch for my daughter. Just a small note, when he makes the promise, Abraham tells him that the promise should be done by holding on to Abraham's circumcision. Now, the idea of holding on to Abraham's circumcision is because this was the only object that existed at that time that carried any holiness. God Almighty commanded on the circumcision. So that commandment of God regarding circumcision, this is what turned that space in the body into something holy. There was nothing else really that carried holiness in it until God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. After the Torah was given, you have tefillin, you have the Torah scroll, you have a mezuzah, you have other items who carry holiness. At that time, the only thing that carried holiness, really, anything physical that carried holiness, was the Brit, was the circumcision. And the same thing also we see later on when Yaakov wants Yosef to promise him that he will bury him in the land of Israel. Also there, the circumcision is being used, the Brit is being used as a object to hold on to at the time of making an oath. The story continues that the slave, again, his name is not mentioned, he takes 10 camels and he goes down to Aram Naharaim, that is on the border where Syria and Turkey meet. And this place exists until today. They actually have findings and diggings in that place that historically showed that that was the place called with the name of the place is called Haran, Harron. This is the place where traditionally this was a place where Avram came from and where Rivka lived and resided at that time. But here begins something really mysterious that is really questionable. And this is what we're going to touch on. He arrives to the well of the water and he turns to God and he says, God, do kindness with my master Abraham. I'm standing here by the well of water, and the girls of the city are going to come out to draw water from the well. And he's making a sign. He's asking God that he wants to make a sign. The girl that I will ask her to give me from her jug, and she will answer, I'll give you, and I will give your camels as well. This will be proof that this is the girl that was meant to Yitzchak. And with this, I will know that you're doing kindness with my master. So basically, because he doesn't know who the girl is, he doesn't know who is meant to be Yitzchak's wife. He's in an unknown land. So he turns to God and he's asking to God, I want to make a sign. So I want to ask every girl that comes out to the well, I want to ask her to give me a drink of water. I'm a stranger. So if she tells me, drink, and I'll give your camels to drink as well, I will know that this is the one, and I will know that this is kindness with my master. And this is what actually happens immediately. Terem kila ladaver, before he even finishes his talk to God. And suddenly Rivka comes out. She carries a jug on her shoulder. And the servant sees something very interesting. As this girl gets close to the well of the water in the well is rising. Now we have this rising of the water in the well multiple times throughout the book of Genesis and even in the book of Exodus, where we have a situation where someone comes to the well of water and the water is rising as a sign that this is a righteous person. We have it last week, we have it regarding Avram making the peace treaty with the Philistines. And the test is whatever the water will rise in the well, that's the sign that the well belongs to him. We have here the story with the well as well, where the water is rising for Rivka. And this is how Eliezer knows that Rivka is meant to be the wife for Yitzchak. And next week, we're going to have this, in the following week, we're going to have the story of Yaakov by the well. The same thing, the water is rising. And then we're going to have a book of Exodus, the story of Moshe by the well. The well becomes a symbol, an ongoing symbol of a place where relationships are created. And also the water rising symbolizes the righteous, symbolizes the people who are having to show some type of a sign. The sign is the rising of the water in the well. So when the servant sees what happens, he runs over to her and he goes to test the sign that he asked from God. He goes over to the girl and she said to her, give me a little bit of water from your jug. And the girl says, Shtei adoini. Here, you have what to drink. She takes off her jug and she gives the servant to drink. Then in verse 19, after she finished giving the servant to drink, Vatoimer, she keeps on saying, Gam legmalecho eshov. I will give your camels, I will continue drawing water for your camels, ad im kilu lishtois, until they're going to be completed with drinking. And you see what she does. Vatemaher, she rushes, vatar kado el. She goes over and she fills her jug with water. Vatoratz oidelaber lishoiv, she runs to the well to get more. Atishav l'chol gmalov, and she gives to all his camels to drink. And she's waiting until the camels finish drinking. Now you have to understand, camels drink a lot. One little girl at the age of 3 serving camels to drink, we're talking here about an enormous amount of water that she is pouring until those camels are finished drinking. And this is where he basically has his final sign. This is the one. She's exactly what we are looking for. Now, there's an interesting commandment that is in the book of Leviticus. The commandment is Veloi senachashu. Veloi senachashu means you're not allowed to do tricks like this with God. What is the example of menachesh? The example of menachesh is a person says, he walks outside and he says, if I see a cat walking down the street, that means today is going to be a bad day. If I see a deer passing by, that means it's going to be a good day. Bread falling out of my mouth while I'm eating, that means this and this is going to happen. All those types of signs that a person makes himself regarding things that are going to happen, basically deciding his life based on signs, is prohibited. It's called veloi senachashu. The same way you're not allowed to look into the astrology and decide your life based on the horoscope. It's a prohibition in the Torah. For those of you who don't know, it's prohibited for a Jew to look into the alignment of stars and decide his life based on the times. It's called veloi se'oinenu, to go by the astrology and going by the alignment of stars, the way some people do through the horoscope or whatever it's called. There is a prohibition to go to fortune tellers, people who read your palm of your hands, or people who talk to the dead and they give you messages. It's prohibited. It's biblically prohibited. The same way also there is a prohibition, veloi senachashu. You're not allowed to put signs for God saying, if this and this happened, that means that God wants me to do this and this. Now, this is something that many times people come with questions regarding certain things that are happening in their life, and they are drawing certain conclusions regarding what Hashem is trying to tell them. That's a prohibition of veloi senachashu. And the Torah completes, when the Torah gives us all this prohibition, the Torah completes, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha. You have to go with God in innocence. You don't ask questions, you don't test him, you don't make all types of questions about God. You don't ask God to show you signs. Question is, what's happening here? The servant clearly is asking God for a sign. He's clearly asking from God to show him a signal, something to know who the girl is. And the answer is very simple. The servant is not asking God for a sign. what the servant is doing is doing a test. He doesn't know the girl from anywhere. He doesn't know the qualifications of this girl. He has to know one thing. Does this girl fit to be the wife of Yitzchak? He knows Yitzchak. He grew up side by side with Yitzchak. He saw how Yitzchak is being educated and brought up as a child in his house. He knows the boy. He knows the qualities of Yitzchak. He knows what type of a child he is. He knows who the mother of Yitzchak was. His mother was Sara, beautiful, kind lady, in an open house and an open tent. He knows who Yitzchak was. He knows who Yitzchak's mother was. He knows Yitzchak's father, Abraham. Abraham was a very wonderful man, a house of kindness. He's going to find a shidduch. He's going to find a wife for Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, what type of a wife Yitzchak needs to have? He knows. He knows that in this family you need to have a girl who fits into the family. Now, Yichus, he knows. Yichus has to be that she has to be from Mesopotamia. She has to be from the family of Abraham. But what's most importantly is testing and knowing the character traits. Knowing if this girl fits in. I mean, obviously, it's nice, all those qualities. If she's good looking, if she has comes from the right family, all of that is important details. But the most important detail is her character trait. Does she have the character of someone who is going to take the place of Sara? Is she going to be the next matriarch of the Masorah community, of the tradition who will create the Jewish people? Does she fit in? Does she fit in to that Jewish destiny? Is she going to be the matriarch of the Jewish people? Is she fitted to be the wife of Yitzchak? And for this, there is only one thing you need to know. Is she kind? Does she have the kindness of Abraham? Does she have the kindness of Abraham and Sarah? The kindness of Abraham and Sarah is not the kindness that is at the mainstream. Love and kindness in the mainstream, even the people who are the most kind, every kindness comes with a price. Something has to give. If you want to be kind, if you want to be loving, there is a place where that kindness stops. It has a limit. Everyone has a limit. Everyone has a certain level of tolerance, how much is willing to give for the sake of kindness. But kindness, the way Abraham is raising his family, the kindness that Abraham and Sarah imbued in their son Yitzchak, and the love and kindness that she, as a daughter-in-law, who has to continue that tradition, this is not the usual mainstream kindness. This is the kindness where the person is willing to be in a place of unconditional, boundless love. Now, what is the test? If I ask her to give me to drink, and she gives me to drink, that's wonderful. But if I ask her to drink, and she says, I'm not just going to give you to drink, I'm also going to give your camels to drink, this is a sign that the love goes beyond my request. This is a sign of someone who doesn't just have a human-to-human love. This is a sign that this is a person who has love to all creatures. This is someone that love by him is something that's totally unconditional. What we call in English, divine love. is willing to even give love to those poor camels who just came from a long journey. And she's willing to give those camels to drink as well. This is a higher level of sensitivity. This is a level of love that's beyond my request. That will be a sign if she's feeded, if she's the one who will be the next one in line to continue the legacy of Sara and to continue the legacy of Abraham. So when he asks her, will you give me some water to drink? And she says, not only for you I'm going to give to drink, I'm going to take care of your camels as well. And then she waits until the camels are finishing to drink. She doesn't just pour the water and go home. And then she discusses with them his hospitality. And she says to him, when he asks about a place for him to stay, she says, not just for you. We have place for you to stay, for the people who are traveling with you, and we even have place for your camels to stay. This is when the servant gets a clear message that he's not just talking to someone who has human to human kindness. This is someone who is gifted with divine love, unconditional kindness, love without bounds, unlimited, the way Abraham lives his life. Now, those of you who remember from last week, Abraham's petitioning for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, they should survive. He knows what type of people live in Sodom and Gomorrah. He knows how cruel and how terrible they are. He knows them more than anyone else. He's their neighbor. He knows what type of cruelty and vicious behavior was happening in the walls of those cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And instead of taking the side of God of destruction, he goes on and petitions and begs. And he doesn't go away until he exhausts all arguments to try to save even the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's not just human to human love. That's not conditional love. This is divine love. This is love that surpasses the limitations of one person to another. It's a love that comes from a place in you that transcends every finitude, every limitation. The idea of opening a tent in the middle of the desert where the four doors are open to all sides. And the way we traditionally, every time a husband and wife get married, we make a chuppah. And the chuppah has those four sides are open, symbolizing the tent of Avram and Sara. The idea of creating the Jewish home under the canopy of the chuppah, that the essence of a Jewish house is built on that limitless love, the love without bounds, the kindness that transcends all entrances from all four sides, from the east, from the west, from the south, from the north, allowing and opening. That's divine love. Obviously, as we learned last week as well, God Almighty is coming to visit him. God Almighty is coming to see how Avram is doing after that painful surgery, the circumcision. And as we learned last week, Avram turns to God and he says, Al no Adonai. Please, God, take a rest. I have guests. He leaves God in the middle of a meeting and he goes to a tent for three. He doesn't know they are angels. 3 Arabs, 3 desert travelers who are worshiping the dust of their feet. This is what the Talmud tells us. This was people who wasn't just people who serve God, the people who had their own spiritual ideas. These are people who were worshiping the dust of their feet. And Avram says to God, God, it's wonderful that you're coming to visit, but I have 3 guests who need to be fed. That's not just human to human love. That's not love with rationale. This is a love that transcends all bounds and all limitations and brings a human being to a place of such heights where all calculations, all boundaries are being completely removed in order to take care and be there, fully present for the need of a fellow human being. So what the servant is doing is not just testing God and asking God for a sign. He's doing a deeply psychological evaluation. Does this girl actually fit to be the wife of Yitzchak? Does this girl actually fit to be the one who will enter the house of Abraham and Sara and be the one to fill that tent who was so empty after the death of Sara? That matriarch who is gone, and now we have to fill in that seat. Who will be the next matriarch of the Jewish people? Now you think Rivka was, a 3-year-old girl, just innocent, running and filling up water for the camels, just following orders of some adult man who is asking you to do that? No, 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 no. This Rivka was quite sophisticated. As we see, we're going to read next week how smart she was, how sophisticated she was. She wasn't just a passive 3-year-old who was asked to fill up water and she just runs and fills up water. Just a sign to tell you that she passes the test in flying colors. She becomes the one because of her conviction, because of her ability to show this divine level of love, this level of giving in a way that's overly over human boundaries. Now, what does the servant do the moment he realizes that she's the one? And here, guys, I want to share with you something really powerful. What happens at the moment when he sees that she's the one? Verse 22, when the camels finish drinking, what does the servant do? He's so baffled. He's so shocked by the success, by how quickly he hit the target. What does he do? When the camels finish drinking, the servant takes a nose ring made out of gold. Beka mishkoloi tells us how much it weighed. It weighed a beka. Now, what is a beka? What's the weight of a beka? So those of you who will quickly search through the Bible, where do we have the term beka? Rashi does for us an easy job. He mentions it already in Rashi. Rashi says, Remez leshikle Yisrael. He was hinting to her the shekels that the Jewish people are going to give in the desert. Every Jew in the desert had an obligation to bring a half a shekel. The half a shekel is beka lagul goyles. Every person had to bring a shekel that was the size of a beka. Suddenly, in an incident between Rivka and the servant has to give her a nose ring. That nose ring will remind her about the half a shekel that will be brought to the Jewish people in the desert hundreds of years later. Ma kesher, what's the connection? But not only that, Ushnei tzmidim al yadeo. He gives you two bracelets. Two bracelets. And he tells us how much those bracelets weigh. Sara zov mishkolam. They were weighing 10 gold. This is how much they weigh. Says Rashi, what is the 2 bracelets? Why 2 bracelets? Why not 1 bracelet? Why not 3 bracelets? Says Rashi, 2 bracelets. Remez l'shnei luchos. 2 bracelets refer to the 2 tablets that Moshe brought down from Mount Sinai. Why do we need to know how much a 2 bracelet weighed? Asora zov mishkolam. The 2 bracelets together weighed 10 gold. Rashi says, Remez la'aseres adibros. It came to hint the 10 commandments. So he's not just giving her gifts. When he recognizes that she is the one carrying that divine level of love, when he recognized that she is the one on such a high level, is he right away pulls out two gifts. And those two gifts are not just two gifts. One gift is supposed to hint about the half a shekel that the Jewish people will donate when they're going to build a tabernacle in the desert. Every Jew had an obligation to give a half a shekel. And then he also gives her two bracelets that are weighing 10 silver, 10 gold. What is this? Says Rashi, two tablets, 10 commandments. What does it have to do with this whole marriage right now? Talking about a story is making a shidduch. Suddenly he has to give her the half a shekel, and he has to remind her of the 10 commandments. And then continues the story where she invites him to stay in his house. What exactly is happening over here? What is the idea of the half a shekel? And again, over here lays the foundations of how a Jew has to look on love, on marriage, and on any relationship that we have between one another. What is the idea of the half a shekel? And we learned it many, many times. Why did God ask the Jewish people to give a half a shekel? Wouldn't it be easier that everyone should donate a whole shekel? Everyone should give a whole shekel. And when we're going to count all the shekels together, we'll know how many Jewish people exist. Why did God ask for a beka, a split shekel? Beka means split. Why? Why half? So we know what is being explained. The idea behind the half a shekel is that each and every one of us has to know that we are only a half. There is only half. You are only half. You need the fellow Jew to make you whole. You are not a whole shekel. You always need another person. And you and one more person, you have two halves. So when a person has an attitude, when it comes to relationships, that you are only half, and the other person that you are marrying, or your partner that you bring into your business, or even a friend, is your other half. He has something, he has a piece that you don't have. The reason why you have a relationship with him is because what you need is that piece that you're missing. And that friendship has to go on forever because you will never have that piece unless you have that other person with you. That attitude, that I am only half, when a person adopts that attitude, this is when true relationships can happen. This is when true love can happen. When someone knows I am only half, I need the other person in my life, not because I just need another souvenir hanging in my wall, or the way they call it in the language, I need a trophy wife or a trophy husband. No. Your husband and your wife and your friends, they are not trophies. They're not something that you acquire just to have something cute in your life. Really, I don't need anybody. My life is great and perfect. I have a beautiful bank account. I own a beautiful house. But you know what? I just need to have a cute guy living around me, or a cute wife. Or I need to have some cute children. That's the beginning of all disasters. The beginning of a true loving relationship is when you look at your spouse and you know, I cannot exist without another person. This is my other half. I might not like it. There are certain things about that other half that really make me upset. but that's my other half, and I need that. I love it unconditionally. So when you look at the people around you, everyone around you, and you get the attitude that every person next to you is there to fill you in a piece of you that's missing, this is when relationships begin. It's not a love that's dependent on something that a person will give you or not give you. It's the attitude is that the other person is only half of what you are. And you take that attitude with every person in your life. And as our sages tell us, who is the true wise man? The one who learns from every person. Every person becomes your teacher. Every person becomes your other half. And when God gave us the mitzvah, and he says, I want to count you, the Jewish people. I want to show you how much I love you, because I count you. No one counts things that he wanted to count to see how many Jews they are. God says, I want a half a shekel, because I want you to know for forever and ever that each and every one of you is worth it, only half. And you need one another in order to be the Jewish people. You need each other in order to create this beautiful body called the Jewish nation. When Rivka shows an act of love, not regular love, but she shows an act of divine love, love without boundaries. What does the servant do? He gives her a nose ring that is worth it a half a shekel, hinting to her that she's embodying with her behavior and she's preparing herself the marriage to be in a place of knowing her space, knowing that she's only half. Then he gives her 2 bracelets. And we said, what are the 2 bracelets? The 2 bracelets are the 2 tablets. And the Torah tells us that the 2 bracelets together weighed 10 silver, 10 gold, the 10 commandments. And here comes the question. Why did God give 2 tablets? Why cannot God give us 1 tablet that has all the 10 commandments? Why did God have to write it in 2 tablets? There's a famous joke that goes always around about the God went to all the nations and he asked them, do you like the Torah? And everybody came up with an excuse that they don't like it. And then he came to the Jewish people. He asked, do you want the Torah? And they say, how much is it? And God said, it's for free. So they said, oh, for free, give us 2. So that's kind of like a joke that God gave us the 2 tablets. But why really is there 2 tablets? Why couldn't Moshe write down the 10 commandments on 1 tablet? So difficult to find 1 tablet and write the 10 commandments on it. And the simple answer is that 1 tablet talks about the laws between human and God. I am God, your God. Don't say my name in vain. Don't bear false. Honor your father. Keep the Shabbos holy. Honor thy father and mother. The other tablet is all laws between human and human. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not commit adultery. You should not covet. It's all laws between human and human. However, both of them were given together. The idea is that the Torah is not just a Torah of between me and God. You know, my relationship with God is important. What's happening between me and my children and my home, that's not God's business. The way I conduct myself with my neighbor, that's not God's business. I go to church, I go to prayers, I do my daily prayers, I daven every day, I'm a tzaddik. Between me and God, life is perfect. I keep Shabbos, that's great. Now, what happens between me, how I treat another person, my lies and my cheating and all of that stuff, that's not God's business. Comes the 10 commandments and we're given on 2 tablets who tells you the same God that wants from you to keep Shabbos holy, the same God who wants from you not to say his name in vain, the same God that he wants you to believe in his oneness, the very same God says, don't touch what doesn't belong to you. Don't violate another person's boundaries. that this is basically the summary of you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you should not covet. The idea of not crossing this idea that there is no fragmentation, this idea that everything is important, the highest of the high, I am God, you're God, that is divinely written. And you shall not covet, something very personal, coveting your neighbor's good-looking fields and property, and he's coveting his beautiful wife or his beautiful husband. All of that is all God's will, without any fragments. All of them are engraved on the Ten Commandments. All of them given at Matan Torah. This is true love. When someone understands deeply that everything matters, the big things in the relationship matter, and even the smallest things, even what's happening in my heart inside, my coveting, even that becomes a distraction and a disturbance of relationship. This is when true love happens. If you believe that only the big things are important, I have to remember the anniversary, I have to remember my spouse's birthday, I have to make sure I don't break windows in the house, I have to make sure I don't step with mud on the white carpet. But what's happening when I'm by myself in my office and the door is closed and I'm sitting in front of my computer? That's not my wife's business. That's not my spouse's business. That's my business. If a person doesn't understand that even the smallest details of your life can and will become a distraction for the relationship that you have not begun to act in the space of divine love. Even making a joke to friends in the office about your spouse, or making a derogatory comment under your nose, and even thinking derogatory thoughts on a person you're supposed to love, is a destruction of your relationship. It's a disturbance of what's supposed to exist between one person and another person who committed each other to love one another forever. So when he gives her the two bracelets, reminding you of the Ten Commandments, reminding you of the two tablets, giving you the understanding that it's not just enough to know that you are half and the other person is your other half, and always seek the completion that will exist with both of you being in a relationship together and knowing how the other one is important for you. Divine love, true love exists when someone lives a life who he knows every detail in my day has to be aligned with the truth of my love. Every detail of my behavior, even every thought in my mind has to be purified so that it doesn't disturb, it doesn't distract, it doesn't, God forbid, hurt that relationship. Now we have a whole new understanding what's happening here between the slave and Rivka. A whole long Maisa, a whole long Megillah about coming to the well and waiting for her to show up and asking from God for a sign. Suddenly we understand that there's a whole description, a whole recipe, how love has to be created, how a relationship, what is a relationship based on? And here we're going to come to the completion. What happens at the end? The girl, Rivka, travels with Eliezer. She goes to the land where Yitzchak lives. And the story continues. She sees the beautiful man. She sees Yitzchak. She falls off the camel. And then the Torah tells us about their marriage. Vayeviel Yitzchak, the last verse in this long chapter. Yitzchak brings Rivka ha'ayala to the tent. Sara imo. She becomes Sara, his mother. So Rashi tells us, what does it mean she becomes Sara, his mother? His wife becomes his mother. What does it mean she becomes his mother? I mean, some of us will say, yeah, my wife really reminds me of my mother. But what does it mean she becomes his mother? So Rashi says, as long that Sarah was alive, there was always a candle burning in the tent. There was always a blessing in the dough, and there was always a cloud hovering over the tent. It's a mysterious cloud that was always on top of the tent. When Sarah died, all of those three things disappeared. The candle stopped burning, the dough was not filled, and the cloud went away. But when he brought in Rivka into the tent, spontaneously, with her coming into the tent, all those three things came back. And when he saw that, he immediately knew Rivka is the continuation of Sarah. She's here to take the place of Sarah. Now, what was those three things? And this is the three things, the three commandments that every woman, every Jewish woman follows. Challah, the dough is the mitzvah of challah, taking off a piece from the dough and making the blessing. The candle symbolizes the Shabbos candle, the Ner Shabbat, and the cloud over the tent symbolizes the holiness and the spirit of the tent. And this is that the Jewish wife goes to the mikveh every month, bringing in the sanctity and the holiness into the intimacy, into the relationship between the husband and wife. So that was a symbol of the cloud. They said the three letters Chana, the Jewish name Chana. Ches is for Chala. Nun is for Nida, that is mikveh. And the Hey is for Hadlakat Aner, the lighting of the candle, the three mitzvahs that every woman follows. But it's very interesting to see what the Torah says. Vayeviea Yitzchak Oyala Sara Imai, he brings us to the tent. And then it says Vayikach is Rivka, then he marries her. And then it says Vatehi lo leisha, she became his wife. And then it says Vayeavea, and he loved her. So we have a whole bunch of steps, and this right away will answer the question that Michael asked me privately: how could Yitzchak marry a 3-year-old girl? Yitzchak did not marry a 3-year-old girl. She arrives when she's 3 years old, but here the Torah tells us how the process worked. First, she moved into the tent of Sarai's mother. After that, when she got to the age of marriage, that at that time it was the age of 13 for a girl, then it says, Vayikach es Rivka, he married her. He waited a little bit between the betrothal and the marriage. Vatehi loy leisha, she became his wife, and that was at the moment when she reached full adulthood. This she went when he took her as a wife. But it's interesting to see what is the last thing after bringing it to the tent, taking her for a wife, betrothal, and then taking her for a wife. Yeah, there's 4 things here. Bringing it to the tent. Number 2, Vayikach es Rivka, that this was betrothal, that he, at the age of 13, is when he gives her the ring of marriage. Then he waits 2 years after that, age of 15, I assume. Vatehi lo leisha, she becomes his wife. But the last thing on the list is number 4. It says, Vayeahavea, he loved her. Interesting where the love comes. Usually, in the society that we live in, first you fall in love with someone. And then, you hang out with that person for a little while. and then eventually you get married. Here, what happens here is very interesting. First, he takes it into the tent, and she becomes over there. She takes over his mother's position, I guess, in the tent. And then, after living in the tent for a while, he does the betrothal, and then he gets married to her as a wife. And then only at the end he loves her. What's going on over here? Why is the love coming so late? Again, here we have another signal of how a relationship have to look like. You know, we are such products of our modern society that we have lost all understanding how true love is developed. And that's quite frankly, this is the disaster of our generation, among many other problems in our generation, is the complete loss of understanding and awareness and consciousness about how love has to look like. You probably remember from Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye turns to his wife and she says, "Do you love me?" And she looks at him like, "I'm pressing your shirts, I'm sharing your house." And Tevye keeps on bothering her. "Do you love me?" That was the generation who was introduced to the whole idea of love. And they didn't really know what to do with all that information. What do you mean you love me? Sure, I love you. I live with you in the same house. You remember that piece from Fiddler on the Roof? It's very cute how he tries to get her to admit, "But do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." What does it mean? Judaism, the Torah, views love, that's the beautiful feeling of romantic love, as something that has to be developed. You don't fall in love. We have a character we're going to read about in a couple of weeks who falls in love first with someone, and he ends up raping that person. Dinah, the story of Dinah, over there, it says that the man loved her, and then he tried convincing her to get married after he raped her, and so on and so forth. The love comes first. That excitement, the romanticizing of love, that temptation comes as a first. When it comes to divine love, this is the story of Yitzchak. It's a love that's developed within several years. You land on that love. You land on that love after seeing the qualifications of a person, really developing a unity of souls, seeing the progression and the growth by first seeing is a spiritual feeder to be the spouse of yours. Is she the one continuing the legacy and the teachings of the family? Is she actually adapting to the teachings of your mother, Sara, and all the good that you know in your life? And then comes the time of betrothal, and then the times of marriage. And with all these foundations being laid out, you're obviously going to land up on love. But what type of a love? A love that's divine, a love that's going to be everlasting, a love that's not dependent on mood swings, a love that's not dependent about the give and take. Oh, what do you remember my birthday? You didn't remember. Did you buy me? Did you didn't do me? What did I do for you? What are you doing for me? It's a love that's developed with a foundation and a basis of such great foundations that when you land on that love, you have true divine love. You have the true divine kindness in your life. So from this parsha, we learn a lot of basics of life. What is our responsibility? How are we supposed to view our relationships? Are we supposed to invest in our relationships? Are we supposed to turn the most basic things of our humanity into an Abrahamic, into a holy way the way our patriarchs and matriarchs taught us and paved out the way for each and every one of us, how our relationships are supposed to look like. So with this, I want to wish each and every one of you a good Shabbos. God Almighty should bless us. We should find love in our life. We should develop the love in our life and able to see love and kindness between one another. Anyone who wants to ask any questions or say comments, please turn on your mic.